Hello, and welcome to this video on the Poly Effects Trails, a pedal that creates unique, unfamiliar effects that sustain and grow. Here's what's to come. This video is sponsored by Poly Effects. So hi, I'm Ben, DivKid, and welcome to this Pedals and Patches series video. Pedals and Patches is a series where we explore pedal effects with synthesizers, modular gear as a creative studio effects format, and with some other instruments too. This is Trails from Poly Effects, and Poly Effects have a couple of nice lines that I'd like to quote about what this is and what it does. Poly Effects say that Trails offers unfamiliar effects that sustain and grow. They invite you to journey into diverse and exotic soundscapes, and to explore effects from off the beaten track. And I think all of those quoted statements are true. These are unique effects, some of which might be more familiar to your rack users, but things that are more rarely found in pedal form. And there's lots of novel, interesting effects that provide engaging textures, behaviours, and ways to work with sound, or even ways to create new instruments. Trails is true stereo, with stereo in and out on TRS sockets on the back, and there's mini jack TRS MIDI in and out for external control, and there's even some onboard sequencing between effects and presets. You can go mono to stereo, and you can go fully wet with a kill dry option too. There's 7 effects types on Trails. We have Meadows, which is a resonator with sympathetic strings. Haven, which is a more bell-like tone, a modal synthesizer style resonator with options for chord tones. Prairie is a vinyl record emulating delay. Outback is a model of a mouth for talkbox and phaser-like sounds. Tundra is a pitch shifting delay. Badlands is a totally unique distortion like nothing else that I've used. And Coast is a micro-looping frozen granular sound generator. Each mode has 4 basic parameters as mentioned, with these touch sliders, and these offer a wet to dry blend going fully wet to fully dry on A, and then B, C and D sliders all offer different controls in different modes, but generally they're time controls, length settings, tonal controls, or things like granular density controls as well. As well as the bypass switch to turn things on and off, there's also a sustain switch, which in most of those modes is a freeze, allowing you to freeze a buffer and create additional textures to play over, or even to create new instruments from. So we'll be using a whole range of instruments and creating a wide range of effects and examples. That's all in the detailed timing index below, so do skip around. And just generally, I'd encourage people to explore pedals with synths and modular gear. And if you're into that, there's the pedals and patches playlist link down below, as well as links to the Polyeffects nicely visual manual for trails. Without further ado, let's dive in. So here we're exploring the Meadows, and this is a set of sympathetic strings, and for modular users think mutable instruments rings, where you have a resonator that excites a sound, in this case sympathetic strings. And what we're running in is everyone's favourite drum machine, the Rhythm Wolf. Here it is dry. You're going to see me, these channels are all different drums, you'll see me remove things like the kick and the snare here. Maybe change the pattern. But this is the dry sound coming straight into trails here. Going fully wet, I have the first slider, which is the wet-dry blend, down in its fully wet position. We have control over the pitch of these strings. We then have the structure, which you can think of the kind of tensions within those strings, and that resonator changes the harmonics a lot. And you can get into kind of sitar or sarod-like sounds. And you can actually control this. You can control the pitch of these strings via MIDI. So I have an external keyboard here, and as I play a note, here I'm transposing this pitch slider here, B. So we have pitch control, and we can use MIDI for pitch as well. And then we also have a kind of bonus bit of granular processing. Think of it like rings and clouds for fans of mutable instruments. Let's simplify it, let's just do the hi-hats here. This is just the drum machine, just the hi-hats, exciting these sympathetic strings. But on top of that, you can start to seed some grains, some granular processing, where it's off in the middle, and you get regular grains coming down. So what we'll do here is actually freeze a sound, because the density control is still active when frozen. To stop my drum machine, and then let's seed some grains there. They are regular, coming down from center at an increasing rate, and they're irregular, random in their timing, going up from center. I'm quite enjoying leaving those off. And just playing with this as a set of sympathetic strings and a resonator for other sounds. So here we're exploring Prairie, vast grasslands where time moves differently. And poly effects say it's not a tape delay, or a model of one of course, and it's not a bucket brigade delay, but think of it as a vinyl record that's playing back what you've just played, filled with all the crackle and character you might expect from a kind of aged, dusty old record. And here's some of the more extreme settings you can get from this mode, but going dry here. You may notice there's already some vinyl style noise, and this is a stereo. I'm coming in and out in stereo here, Rhodes piano or Rhodes keys loop. And because when I produced a loop, it's something I've used in demos a few times before, I think it was so fitting to having vinyl crackle and character and noise. I actually put some on the recording and production, so there's already some noise there on the dry sound. But we can pile lots more on. And have some fun. Now the sustain there is a kind of vinyl stop. It's like pressing stop on a turntable. You get the pew, but you don't get the whoop kind of speed up of pressing play again there. Now turning down some of these sliders. This is the kind of backwards wet to dry mix, as I highlighted earlier in the video. So we're fully wet here. B controls the length and speed. And you can hear there's quite a lot of feedback. You don't get any feedback control, but that's fine with me. I'm happy with lots of feedback in my delays. And it certainly adds to that kind of vastness of washy ambience that this creates. So we're getting longer in delay time as we move up, until we reach a point where we actually change direction of the record. But once you're recording onto this theoretical record backwards and playing backwards, you're just back to playing the right way around again. It's not like a reverse delay that you can keep in a kind of reverse setting. You'll also note as we get into those longer times that we get more lo-fi sound. The idea here being that you've got less grooves to record into when you're going much slower. And you get a much more aliased kind of lo-fi effect from it. On top of that, let's go a bit faster, which is the age of the vinyl where older records lose high end and dynamic range. So that adds compression, saturation type effects, and almost that kind of nasal telephone-like quality of losing low end and top end. We then have noise on D here, which is the amount of pop and crackle on the vinyl, adding to the noise that's already on my input audio here. But you can hear there's a lot more of it up than when it's down. The noise nicely comes before the age effects, so you can filter those noises. Really nicely too. And you could, if you wanted to, set this at a more kind of standard delay sound, mixing some dry wet, say 50-50 roughly, and setting a more standard delay there. Bit of edge. It's a characterful but not over the top stereo ambience. But I like going fully wet. more lo-fi, more noise, more edge. And really leaning into the character and idea of this crunchy lo-fi vinyl delay. So here I'm enjoying that vinyl delay Prairie mode on a kind of send setup here, sending an effect from my beat through a filter into trails. Now here's the beat without trails. It's a mixture of digital synthesis and samples, and then what's coming out of trails here. I'm sending a copy of my beat through this filter and using the filter like a send. So when I open this low pass filter, that sound comes through into trails and then back in and out of a pedal interface, back into the modular here. So with a filter in front of it, I kind of select where and when I'm sending into the pedal. And with that fully open, I'm really just enjoying scrubbing a fully wet trails here. Just as a kind of beat mangling device. And you could use the MIDI input there, and if you're in modular, a CV to MIDI device to CV control these sliders and have some real fun glitching up your beats. Now doing that against the dry sound, is of course a load of fun, but using an envelope here to just fire sound in on that clap. So this filter's just opening, clap, clap. Just a little pew, little burst of sound. And there's loads of character to play with, of a kind of dub, kind of echo send. There's a kind of dub echo send here. Resonance gives a kind of dub siren. So while we're here, here's the sound of the noise up full with no actual input coming in. There's no sound coming into the pedal here. So I'm going to boost this a lot in post. And then let's use this to excite some of the other resonator modes. But just very quickly, there's those edge filters and compression effects over the vinyl crackle. For those real connoisseurs of the vinyl crackle, and it's also affected by the length of the record, the delay time as well. So I'm going to record and loop some of this, and as I say, we'll use it to excite some of the other effects. So here we're in the Haven mode, and I'm actually using vinyl crackle from the Prairie vinyl delay to excite this bell-like resonator. It's just a loop from that vinyl delay mode that I've boosted in level and created. You'll either see that before or after this, depending on what order I edit the video. But noise profiles and vinyl crackle, they're lovely things to work with musically or in a production, but they work great exciting things like resonators to create these really organic, glistening, moving, random but musical feeling sounds. A is our wet dry again. B is the pitch. And then we have the structure of the sound again with some chord-like tones. And on top of that resonator, again on the D slider there, we have granular control, where we have going down from centre, regularly seeded grains, and above centre, irregularly seeded grains. In fact, if I just freeze this and say remove the input even, we can hear that a bit better. Regular grains, off in the centre, and irregularly timed grains as we go higher up. Now patching the sound back in, turning off freeze. Let's just compare these two modes. Going back to Meadows here, you'll hear the sympathetic strings. So it's really making a sort of tonal choice there. And again via MIDI we can re-pitch. So again, lots of different sounds here would work really well, just like they do in Meadows. It's just a different tone to how this resonator is responding. So here's a really fun use case, which is kind of pinging Haven here, just with bits of percussion, either a full beat or just a singular drum sound or a synth sound even, and using that kind of like a vocoder, but creating these chordal ambient beds. Now outside of trails, got some samples, some synth sounds, got some nice frantic and probability-led random drums. But I can send, and let's remove the reverb I'd added to it, that drum sound to trails. And you can hear how the different bits of the beat there excite this fully wet bell-like modal synthesizer resonator. With structure there, letting us pick different chord tones. Now I can also excite this separately, and if I turn off the pedal, you can hear that just dry. With a square wave into a filter, with an envelope opening the filter there, and the filter's also got a VCA. So it's a very simple, basic sound, but it is changing pitch, being the sequence synth sound that it is. Now that then through trails, interestingly, even though it's fully wet, you still hear those bits of pitch change. And that's going to excite different structures, different chord tones. In different ways. So then washing that out with a load of reverb. It's a really interesting ambient bed. That frantic drum beat. So here we're exploring the Badlands, and Poly Effects say this is a very brutal distortion that combines wave folding and Chebyshev wave shaping. And on just a basic mono synth here, it really is quite interesting. This is just a saw wave. With a bit of soft non-resonant filtering. And that again, fully wet through the Badlands. Kind of sustains and morphs and adds that whoosh, kind of little flutter of noise at the end of the note. And the sound reminded me of, not entirely, but we could kind of think of it as an instant Michael Jackson generator, if you like. If you want to get into some Michael Jackson without it, again, just a really simple sound here. So we have the dry wet, and it does blend very well. We have a typical synth sound. Keeping it fully wet, we have a delay level, which is interesting. It just adds sustain here, and turning on sustain, we just get this long sustain. C is then the number of folds and how aggressive it is. And we then have bias for this folding and shaping. And it's certainly just a very quirky and different shaper that simply just doesn't sound like a modular wave folder or any other distortion that I have access to here. So here's the Badlands on bass. And it's surprising how similar to that kind of Michael Jackson synth thing we did with the Roland synth, how similar in tone it is to just a clean bass guitar going into it. So here's that idea of running the dry sound from the SH09 synthesizer here just into the mix separately, taking a second split from the headphone output into the Badlands distortion, then into a massive reverb. Here's the dry synth sound. And here's that sound just in the fully wet chain. I'll take this out of the mix dry with the Badlands and a massive plate reverb. And let's play them both together. Such a great sound. Here's just the Badlands taking the mix down on that reverb, so no dry, just trails here. Reverb back in. And the dry sound one last time. What a great additional layer to that really basic synth sound. So here's Tundra, which is a pitch shifting delay. And you can shift the pitch of these delays up or down to octaves, just running through the controls here. The wet dry mix as we've had on that first slider throughout. This is some stereo melodic audio that Chris Meyer of Learning Modular sent me as part of my Patreon supporter kind of audio project, as it were. So thanks to Chris for this audio that we can use in the videos. And then going fully wet here. Let's go to a kind of 50-50 blend. Slider B is delay time from very fast. C is feedback. And that plays into the pitch shifting here, which comes from 0 pitch shift down to octaves. up 2 octaves. And if we then add that feedback, those pitch shifted delays cascade into each other, creating this kind of shimmer octave echo or octave delay. But just setting this back at center can be a bit fiddly. There we go, back at 0 pitch shift. I have MIDI coming in here, and we can use MIDI for the pitch shift. So I'll overlay my keyboard here. This note that I have my finger on is 0 pitch shift. And with MIDI, it's really easy to go up, say, 1 octave. Up, say, a fifth. 2 octaves. Down an octave. And you could be sequencing that, playing that alongside the input material, doing all sorts of creative pitch shifting. Now the freeze creates a frozen tundra, and we can use that to create a pad-like bed. You can hear there that lovely sustain, and that's still playable via MIDI. So here's a simple idea that just uses an octave down on this Tundra pitch delay here. Let's start with the dry sound. A simple MS-20 sound here. Now enabling trails, you instantly hear this shift an octave down. And you can hear it's got this great kind of cinematic quality to it. Those swells work really well, and a splash of ambience after this might work well. I'll overlay something on screen if I add some reverb in post. Here it is fully wet. Again, here's that dry. What works really well is actually freezing this, and via MIDI you can then re-pitch those frozen notes. So if I just play in a C and hit freeze on the sustain, this is now sustaining. And via a different keyboard, I have MIDI coming in here, and if I overlay that and play some notes, that's re-pitching the frozen sound. So I can play new dry sound in here, as I have my wet-dry blend. I could play MIDI into this to re-pitch as I do this, and I have this kind of symphonic, duophonic type synth sound here. An interesting technique, using one MIDI keyboard or controller to re-pitch frozen sounds, or playing other dry sounds over the top. So again, here's some patron supporter audio, and it's a nice modular sequence from Zero Looks Given. Thanks to them for the audio. Here it is dry. A simple but nice musical sequence, and here's that with the impulse response reverbs from the Poly Effects verbs. And I'm not going to make a feedback loop here, but a shimmer reverb would be a reverb that then feeds back into a pitch shifter that feeds back to the input of the reverb. I'm simply going to take this pitch shifting delay on trails after the reverb and create a shimmer-like effect. It's set to be an octave higher, and that without the reverb sounds like this. It's got this dreamy, kind of psychedelic, pitchy, shimmery thing going on. So by drowning this sound in reverb first, then adding this on top, we've got a really dreamy shimmer reverb-like effect. This is the Outback mode on this Australian-made pedal, and it is a kind of model of a mouth, a vocal Foreman-like filter that models the mouth and the tongue and creates kind of talk box Foreman-like synth or phaser style sounds. This is just the saw wave coming in, with a sequence to the saw wave, and here it is fully wet. Let's remove the sequence going to my oscillator here. Here's just a droning low-pitched saw. And here it is through this Outback mode. We have our wet to dry control on A. B is then the speed that they say is the speed of the mouth opening and closing, so think of it like LFO speed. C is then shape, and it's the kind of curve the open and closing action follows, so think LFO speed and LFO shape. With quite a lot of variation in between those extreme settings. And then D, they're saying, is the tongue position. It changes the position of the lips and the tongue, changing the frequencies that pass through. So there we have a mouth filter. So with the sound of the Outback mode just on a saw wave, I figured we'd run it through, or rather run an aggressive synth through it. And the MS-20 can certainly do aggressive. Here it is fully wet. And then blend in some of that dry sound back in again, where this sounds more like a kind of phaser, less obvious and less resonant and aggressive. So here I'm playing with the Outback mode as this kind of open, resonant, highly coloured kind of phaser over my wet effects chain. And hopefully you can just hear this slow, kind of mouthy, resonant sound. Now muting it in the mix, this is Platts. I'm playing with the length and brightness of these notes here. And turning off trails, this feeds some modular effects, which is a filter, a delay and a reverb, and just that against the dry works really well. adding that kind of sheen, that swoosh, that character. With a dry-wet balance. Fully wet, it feels too much. Let's mute the dry. It's quite extreme, it's very resonant and it sounds a bit clipped and saturated. But bringing in a mix setting that has a lot of the dry. But then this slow shifting mouth around it. I think works really well. And it's not on the dry sound, it's just on this stereo wet sound coming in and out of the modular here. And I'll just let this play for a moment before we move on. So here's the final mode here on Trails, which is the coast, and that's a micro looper and granular texture generator. And they encourage freezing the sound here with the sustain switch and exploring the controls. So let's just do that and I'll go through them once we've frozen some sound. Here's a basic chord sound here, FM sound from the Digitone. With some nice modulation and evolving textures, and then that through Trails. Hopefully you can hear some additional stuttering. Let's do that again and freeze it this time. So now we have some sustained granular processing here from that coarse mode. A is your wet-dry blend, fully wet at the bottom, dry at the top. We have the size of these grains on slider B to much smaller little micro loops to larger grain sizes. And then the shape of those grains, each grain has an envelope, is on C, from more square, aggressive-like pulses. Through more decay-like shapes, rising, swelling shapes. And then we have the density control here on D, how many grains are actively being seeded or how fast they're being seeded. Which, like some of the other modes, that's off in the centre and regular down from centre. And then more irregular in timing, up from that centre position. And nicely, again like some of the other modes, we can use MIDI here, which I have on an external keyboard, to re-pitch this, both in live processing the sound and in a frozen state. There's no actual pitch control on the actual mode here, so that's a really nice addition. I could say take this up an octave from its root position. And you can just freeze sound and play it like an instrument or by itself. So with this frozen, let's pin some different sounds here. Maybe a bit more release on the synth. And washing this out with some reverb downstream. Would work really well here. Let's go back to live processing, so turning the sustain off. Come back down an octave here. And as I play this note, if I change the pitch up an octave on Trails with my external MIDI keyboard, we can leave that set as a kind of octave up granular capture. We could go 2 octaves higher. Let's maybe slow these down then. Bigger grain size, slightly different shape. Let's try then going the other way. Let's come down an octave from that center position. I'll come up another octave here, maybe add a bit more sustain. So here I've sent an octave up pitch message into the device, and I'm leaving that shifting up an octave there on trails, and I'm combining it with just some general ambience, a bit of reverb and delay to kind of create my own ambient pedal board, if you like. There's a dry guitar, just turning the volume up after playing a chord, and then with trails doing some octave up micro looped granular effects. I really love those random octaves up, but they can sound a little dry. So by using a delay pedal, and here it is just with the guitar, no trails, a bit of ambience there. Let's even turn the echo up a bit more. It's going to help create that sound bed and that sustain. So then with trails going into that, really lovely washed out wet ambient effect. If you've got this far in the video, drop a sustain, switch, sync down in the comments. Do you have a favourite mode or where you could see yourself using trails? Let us know. Head to patreon.com/DivKid for a bonus exclusive video with trails, and to support what we do and join our Discord community. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!